Good morning, everyone. Welcome again to this U3A seminar. We're lucky today to have Rohan Quince, who I'm sure is familiar to you all. He's a member of U3A Johannesburg and on the committee. Rohan has given a number of talks at U3A meetings, which have been most enjoyable and entertaining. Rohan is involved with Shakespeare both within U3A and at the National Children's Theatre. I hand over to Rohan for his talk, headed In the Spiced Indian Air by Night. Hi, Rohan.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everybody to The Spiced Indian Air by Night. When I was 7 years old, I became one of the founding members of the first Bryanston Wolf Cub Pack. So my first encounter with India was really through Rudyard Kipling and the Jungle Book. We were very familiar with the stories of Mowgli and the wolves and Shere Khan, the fearsome tiger. We had three very nice Bryanston pack mothers, whom we called Arkela, Raksha, and Balu. But the story from the Jungle Book that really became one of my all-time favorites was Rikki Tikki Tavi, the brave little mongoose who fights against the king cobra, Nag, and his wicked wife, Nagaina. Kipling begins, "This is the story of the great war that Rikki Tikki Tavi fought single-handed through the bathrooms of the big bungalow in Sagoli Cantonment. Darzi, the tailor bird, helped him, and Chuchundra, the muskrat, who never comes out into the middle of the floor, but always creeps round by the wall, gave him advice. But Rikki Tikki did the real fighting." It was only years later that I discovered that a cantonment refers to a British Army encampment in colonial India, and bungalow is derived from a Gujarat word meaning built in the style of Bengal. But what I liked was Rikki Tikki Tavi's war cry when he fights against Nag, written with Kipling's unerring ear for rhythm. "Eye to eye and head to head, keep the measure, Nag. This will end when one is dead, at thy pleasure, Nag. Turn for turn and twist for twist, run and hide thee, Nag. Ha! The hooded death has missed. Woe betide thee, Nag." I also discovered that Indian history began long before the British Raj. As early as 3,000 years before the Common Era, the Indus Valley civilization flourished. Cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa had huge assembly halls and public baths with elaborate water supply and drainage systems. The Vedic period began around 1800 BCE, a series of Indo-Aryan migrations, during which time the Vedas were written, probably the oldest scriptures in the world, and the religion of Hinduism evolved. Around 500 BCE, the Buddha was born in India, and so Buddhism evolved with its noble truths that life is suffering, and the cause of suffering is attachment. Around the same time in India lived Mahavira, the most famous avatar of the Jain religion. The Jains believe primarily in ahimsa, or non-violence. So very devout Jains will actually wear a netting mask over their mouths to make sure that they do not inadvertently breathe in an insect and kill it. So by the time I'd finished Wolf Cubs and Boy Scouts and high school, and I was a hippie student at the University of the Witwatersrand, my perception of India had also evolved. India was now the home of the great Eastern religions. India was where Maharishi taught the Beatles to meditate. We were reading the Bhagavad Gita, which told us, when meditation is mastered, the mind is unwavering, like the flame of a lamp in a windless place. In the depths of meditation, an aspirant knows the joy and peace of complete fulfillment. So India had become the ultimate destination for all hippies around the world. Unfortunately, because of apartheid, South African passport holders were not welcome in India. So I had to wait another 20 odd years until 1993 before the political situation changed. Now, at that time, I was teaching at Georgia Southern University in the little town of Statesboro, Georgia. I was teaching world literature, including South African literature and literature from India. And like all new academics, I was flying around America to deliver papers at academic conferences. Mine were mostly on South African productions of Shakespeare's plays. So when I received a call for papers for a conference on Commonwealth and American women's discourse to be held at Mysore University in India in January of 1994, I thought to myself, I'm sure I can come up with something for that. I've just taken part in a university production of Athol Fugard's play, Hello and Goodbye. My friend Patty, who taught in the communications department, played Hester and I played her brother, Johnny. So I telephoned the American professor who was helping to organize the conference, and I said, how about a paper on representations of women in Athol Fugard's Hello and Goodbye? Great, he said. So Patty and I sent him our proposal for a joint paper, which was accepted. And so it was that in early December of 1993, a full month before the conference, because I wanted to see as much of India as I could, I flew from Atlanta, Georgia, via Los Angeles and Singapore, and arrived in Madras in the state of Tamil Nadu. You can see Madras there. It's now called Chennai in the top corner on the coast. So it really was late in the evening when we landed. So like Titania in A Midsummer Night's Dream, I was immersed in the spiced Indian air by night. I was met at the airport by my friend Raja. We'd been together at graduate school at Southern Illinois University. And after he'd finished his studies, he'd gone back to live in Kodai Canal, one of the hill stations of Tamil Nadu. And as we drove through the almost deserted streets of Madras, I was happy to see that there really were cows lying in the middle of the road. The next morning, we visited the campus of Madras University. It was founded in 1857, and as you can see, has a beautiful setting right on the beach. And as we wandered around the campus, I was reminded of the Indian author R.K. Narayan, whose novels I'd been reading with my American students. Narayan published The Bachelor of Arts in 1937, in which he paints an affectionate and light-hearted picture of student life at the time at just such a university. Chandran was just climbing the steps of the college union when Natasan, the secretary of the debating union, sprang on him and said, "You are just the person I was looking for. You remember your old promise?" "No," said Chandran promptly, to be on the safe side. "You promised that I could count on you for a debate any time I was hard-pressed for a speaker. You must help me now. I can't get a prime mover for the debate tomorrow evening. The subject is that in the opinion of this House, historians should be slaughtered first at 5 tomorrow evening." Well, by 5 the next evening, Raja and I had caught the bus down the coast to Mahabalipuram. Mahabalipuram is a little town famous for its temples, most of which are built next to the beach. Now, the bus journey to Mahabalipuram was an experience in itself. The road was jam-packed with traffic. Cars, other buses, huge brightly painted lorries, carts drawn by bullocks, hundreds of motorbikes, and everyone was hooting loudly. As one American tourist put it, we learned that when a driver honks his horn, it means I'm turning left, or I'm turning right, or I'm going straight ahead, or I'm overtaking on the inside, or I'm overtaking on the outside, or I just feel like honking my horn for absolutely no reason whatsoever other than that I haven't done it in a while. Every time a gap opened up in front of the bus, the driver would accelerate forward, usually into the path of an oncoming lorry, which had pulled out to overtake a bullock cart. A head-on collision seemed inevitable, but at the last moment, both drivers would brake sharply and pull to the left and narrowly avoid hitting each other. In any other country, this would have been regarded as a fairly traumatic near accident, but in India, it was considered perfectly normal. What made the journey magical was that both sides of the road were lined with hundreds of little shops and stalls and thousands of pedestrians. So every time the bus ground to a halt, which was quite frequently, I would be staring out of the windows with wide eyes and open mouth, and often I would catch the eye of some shopper or stall keeper, and there would be a tentative smile and then a huge big grin. So I really felt that I'd gone to a land which was exotic and noisy and colorful, but where the inhabitants were very friendly and welcoming. From Mahabalipuram, we traveled further down the coast to Pondicherry, which was formerly a French colony. And then we went inland to Kodai Canal. You can see Kodai Canal on the map there. It's in the Western Ghats, the mountains that run down the spine of southern India. And being a hill station, it is considerably cooler than in the surrounding plains. Kodai Canal is a very pretty little town. It's built around a lake and seems to be somewhat cleaner than the average Indian town. There were beautiful views from the mountains down into the valleys, lovely forests to walk through, and clean rivers in which to swim. So it really was a wonderful place to spend a few days. But soon it was time to head north. So I said goodbye to Raja and I caught the bus to Madurai. Now, Madurai is famous for the Meenakshi temple, one of the largest temple complexes in India. I had only a couple of hours before I had to catch the train back to Madras. And I wanted to see the temple, but I also wanted to buy some pants. Now, in those days, most Indian men did not wear Western clothes. They wore either a kind of a wraparound skirt or very loose pajama-style pants made of a light material, perfect for the hot climate. And that's what I wanted to buy. So on my way to the temple, I saw a little clothing shop and stopped in. There were no ready-made pants. But the shopkeeper said, "No problem, we will make up the pants for you immediately." "Oh, no," I said. I only have a couple of hours before I have to catch my train to Madras, and I still want to see the temple." "Go to the temple," he said, "and when you return, your pants will be ready." So I left my backpack in the shop. I went off to see the temple, which was glorious and wonderful and extraordinary. And by the time I got back, my pants were ready. I caught the train back to Madras and then flew up to Bombay, where I met my sister, Pam, who had just flown in from South Africa. So there you can see Tamil Nadu down in the south. Bombay, now called Mumbai, is in the state of Maharashtra, about halfway up on the east coast. I beg your pardon, on the west coast. We went through to the Victoria Terminal, which is the main railway station in Bombay, a lovely example of British colonial architecture. And then we traveled inland to Pune. Our destination was the Osho Ashram. Now, Osho was an Indian spiritual teacher who went to America and founded an ashram in the little town of Antelope, Oregon. All went well until the number of devotees at the ashram started to outnumber the local townsfolk, and it looked as if a democratic takeover of the town council was imminent. So, in true American fashion, the FBI and the immigration services were called in, and Osho was quickly deported back to India, where he founded the Osho ashram in Pune. Now, as you can see, it's a beautiful green oasis in a somewhat dusty town. And every morning we would dress in our maroon robes for the morning meditation, and in the evening in our white robes for the evening meditation. But in between, I signed up for a 3-day course called Finding Your Voice, Finding Your Song. There was a group of about 20 people from all over the world, North America, Europe, Australia, and we started by each singing a song from our homeland. Of course, I sang Sari Marais and the Old Transvaal. And we really spent the next 3 days just singing. And by the 3rd day, we had all created our own songs, complete with lyrics and a melody. And we performed them then for the rest of the group with a keyboard backup, which improved the songs greatly. And it was interesting how the songs really did reflect their creators. I remember a wonderful American woman who had sung in nightclubs in Tokyo. So her song was this magnificent jazzy kind of rendition. As the English teacher, I had the most complicated lyrics. 4 different verses reflecting various aspects of my life, with a chorus for each verse which could be adapted. But it really was a wonderful way to spend 3 days. We now traveled further inland into the state of Maharashtra to see the great caves at Ellora and Ajanta. Now, the Ajanta caves are all Buddhist, and they date back to the 2nd century BCE. What is extraordinary about these caves is that they are all man-made. Unlike our Kango caves or Sterkfontein caves, these were all carved out by hand by little craftsmen. Inside, they are gloriously decorated with paintings and sculptures. But as you can see, the entrance to each cave is quite small, so inside the caves are dark and it's hard to see what's going on, until the tour guide would stand at the entrance to the cave with a large sheet of polished metal and reflect the sun's rays into the cave, thus illuminating the decorations without any pollution. The caves at Ellora are slightly later. They date from the 6th to the 10th centuries. Some of them are Buddhist, some are Jain, and some are Hindu. But the highlight was certainly the Kailasha temple, built in about 753 in the Common Era. And again, what's extraordinary about these caves is that they were all made by human beings. Now, you can almost understand it if they just excavated the whole area and then built the temple in the middle. But no, every single turret and pillar and carving was actually carved by hand as the craftsmen worked down and into the mountain. It was a most extraordinary place to visit. But now it was time to go north, really to visit the Taj Mahal. But fortunately, we bumped into a young English couple who were traveling around India, and they gave us some advice. They said, if you're flying north, your plane is going to land at a little town called Udaipur in the state of Rajasthan. They're marked in red. Now, Udaipur gained some fame in the West when one of the James Bond movies, Octopussy, was filmed there, mostly at the Lake Palace, which used to belong to the Maharaja and is now a luxury hotel. Udaipur is a very pretty little town built along the shores of the lake. And in the next slide, you can see the city palace then built right at the top there. Now, we followed the English tourists' advice to the letter. So when we arrived at the airport in Udaipur, we ignored all the taxis, walked out to the little bus stop, and for 2 rupees caught a bus into the city. Once there, we found an auto rickshaw, and we said, please take us to the Jagdish temple. Next door to the Jagdish temple was the Green Rose Cafe. And as the English lady told my sister, she said, leave your brother in the Green Rose Cafe with the luggage, and you go and choose a guest house, of which there are many in the area. And so it came to be that we stayed at the Center View Guest House, and that was the view from our window looking up towards the city palace. Now, when Indian children see a Western tourist, they generally don't ask for money, but they ask for pens. So one day, as I was wandering around Udaipur, a crowd of little children rushed up to me saying, 1 pen, 1 pen. So I said, no, I'm sorry, I don't have any pens, but if you have paper, I'll show you how to make a paper aeroplane. Well, soon we were all folding up paper and the aeroplanes were flying around the street, at which point they dragged me back to their home to meet their family. And so it was that I became friendly then with Prabhat and his family. We went up a long, narrow staircase and found ourselves in a courtyard with different rooms opening onto it. So you can see there in the previous slide, then a picture of Prabhat and his grandfather. That's his grandmother with a kind of a stretcher bed airing outside. And in the next slide, you can see Prabhat's grandfather playing the sitar. As you can see, they were not a rich family. Prabhat's father was an auto rickshaw driver, so very little furniture, bedding on the floor, and judging from all the bottles, it looks as if Prabhat's grandfather enjoyed the odd tipple. But they served me tea, and then the kids took me up onto the top of the flat roof, which had a beautiful view over the lake, and they taught me how to count in Hindi. Of course, they found my accent hilarious. I remember saying, ek, do, tin, char, panch. No, they'd say, panch, and I'd say, panch, and they would roar with laughter. And on every subsequent visit to Udaipur, I have always stayed at the Centerview Guest House and visited Prabhat and his family. The other highlight of Udaipur was seeing a production of Shakespeare's Twelfth Night at the City Palace. It was wonderful to hear the famous words, if music be the food of love, play on, and then to hear Indian music reverberating around the courtyard with the arches and the turrets under the starry sky. We now traveled up to Jaipur, the pink city. Now, this time we did catch a taxi from the airport, and we were the intended victims of a very common taxi scam in India. We gave the taxi driver the name of a hotel, and after a long drive, we arrived at a totally different hotel. No, that other hotel was no good. He said, this is a much better hotel. No, we said, we want to stay at the other hotel. So we drove off again, and this time we arrived at a shop with no hotel at all. Clearly, he was operating on some kind of commission system. So we got out of the taxi and fortunately were guided by some tourists to a very nice, quiet, clean hotel where we spent a comfortable few days. When I say comfortable, I should talk a little about the Indian hotel pillow. They are notoriously firm to the point of hardness. Now, the famous American author Mark Twain visited India in 1896, and he described the Indian hotel pillow thus. In India, from the beginning, in time of war, fortifications have been built of hotel pillows. It was found that a cannonball could go through earth or sandbag, but when it hit a pillow, it hit with a dull thud and dropped to the ground. We also visited the Palace of the Winds, right, famous for its curved latticework windows. It was built in 1799 and designed in such a way, and you can see in the next slide, that any passing breeze then will be captured by the windows, and inside the palace it will pass. The air passes over running water and little waterfalls, forming a kind of a natural air conditioner. So the temperature inside is much cooler than out in the street. The latticework windows were apparently designed so that the royal ladies of Rajasthan who lived in the palace could see what was going on in the street outside without being seen themselves. Rajasthan is also famous for being the birthplace of Mirabai. Now, Mirabai was a 16th century Hindu mystic poet. She was famous for her total devotion to the Lord Krishna, whom she regarded as her husband. Her poetry combines cosmic imagery with the ironic tone of a calculating lover. She writes, "One night, as I walked in the desert, the mountains rode on my shoulders, and the sky became my heart, and the earth my own body. I explored. Every object began to wink at me, and Mira wisely calculated the situation, thinking, my charms must be at their height. Now would be a good time to rush into his arms. Maybe he won't drop me so quick." We now traveled up to Delhi, which really was very polluted. I remember looking out of the hotel window one morning and thinking, oh, it's actually cloudy today. But when I went outside, I saw it wasn't cloudy. You just could hardly see the sun through all the smog. One of the highlights of Delhi was visiting the Jama Masjid, the great mosque built in the 17th century at the height of the Mughal Empire by the Shah Jahan, who also built the Taj Mahal. Now, we were allowed to climb to the top of one of the minarets. And I remember looking down into the old Muslim quarter with its alleys and little narrow streets and thinking, oh, I just want to go down and get lost in there. So I did. And it was glorious wandering through the little alleys, looking at the shops. And the people were incredibly friendly. I was invited into people's homes and fed oranges and dates. And when it got dark, my new friends actually escorted me to the bus stop and made sure that I got on the right bus to get back to my hotel. I was reminded of the wonderful encounter in E.M. Forster's A Passage to India, first published in 1924, when Mrs. Moore, the elderly English lady who's just arrived in India, unexpectedly bumps into Dr. Aziz in the deserted courtyard of the mosque in the moonlight. An English woman stepped out into the moonlight. Dr. Aziz was furiously angry and shouted, "Madam, madam, madam!" "Oh, oh!" the woman cried. "Madam, this is a mosque. You have no right here at all. You should have taken off your shoes. This is a holy place for Muslims." "I have taken them off." "You have?" "I left them at the entrance." "Then I beg your pardon." "Yes, I was right, was I not? If I remove my shoes, I am allowed?" "Of course, but so few ladies take the trouble, especially if thinking no one is there to see." "That makes no difference," said Mrs. Moore. "God is here." "God is here. Very good. Very fine indeed. I think you are newly arrived in India." We now travel down to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. This has been called the most beautiful building in the world. It was built by the Shah Jahan in memory of his favorite wife, Mumtaz. Ironically, in his old age, the Shah Jahan was overthrown by his son, Aurangzeb, and so he spent his last years imprisoned in the Red Fort at Agra, looking across the Yamuna River at the Taj Mahal. And when he died, he was buried there next to his beloved Mumtaz. And the next slide I included just to show that I really was there. We now traveled south into the state of Madhya Pradesh, to the little town of Khajuraho. Now, Khajuraho is famous for its temples, many of which are carved with erotic sculptures. Some of them are Hindu, some of them are Jain, and they were mostly built between 950 and 1050 AD by the Chandela dynasty. Now, there's a wonderful memoir called Hindu Holiday by J.R. Ackley. He was companion to the Maharaja of Chhatapur in Madhya Pradesh in the early 1920s, and he describes an excursion to Khajuraho to see the temples. He writes, "On the way, Major Pombi warned us that one of the temples," and he described its exact position in the group, "had some highly indecent sculptures on its walls. We must therefore keep clear of it," he said, "in case the ladies followed us." Ackley eventually explored the temples on his own without Major Pombi or the ladies. Every inch of them, it seemed, was carved and sculptured with countless figures of gods and men. There was so much sculpture that I should certainly have missed the indecencies if Major Pombi had not been considerate enough to mention them. As it was, it took me a long time to locate them, but I found them at last. And indeed, you did have to look very hard to actually find the erotic sculptures. Now, Ackley also provides some delightfully satirical portraits of the colonial English ladies themselves. This evening, when I went up to the guest house for dinner, Mrs. Bristow, the young wife of one of the officers, was sitting by the fire reading a book. "What are you chewing?" she said, looking up at me. "A clove." "Well, for heaven's sake, don't. I can't bear the sight. I suppose you chew gum at home." "No, I don't like chewing gum," I said. "Well, do spit that out." "But I like cloves." "Well, I don't. It's disgusting and irritating. Go on, spit it out." "Certainly not." "Go on. I'm accustomed to being obeyed." For a moment she tried on me the power of her eye, which works, I believe, upon the subalterns of her husband's regiment, but this also failed to move my clove. "Look here," she said, "let me give you a word of advice. Don't go Indian." From Khajuraho, we traveled further east into the state of Uttar Pradesh, to the holy city of Varanasi, formerly called Benares. It is built on the banks of the Ganges River, and some Hindus believe that if you die in Varanasi, you are immediately liberated from the cycle of birth and death and rebirth. The city is built with these large stone steps going down to the river. They're called ghats. And we also visited the burning ghats, where you could see bodies being cremated on large piles of sandalwood. Ironically, it's now very expensive to buy enough wood to cremate a body, which takes several hours. And so most poor people are now cremated in the municipal crematorium, which at that time cost a mere 100 rupees. Varanasi is also famous for being the birthplace of Kabir. Now, Kabir was a 15th century mystic poet and saint. He was probably born into a Muslim family and later influenced by Hindu teachers. His poetry is about God, but transcends all religions. He writes, "Are you looking for me? I am in the next seat. My shoulder is against yours. You will not find me in Indian shrine rooms, nor in synagogues, nor in cathedrals, not in masses, nor kirtans, not in legs winding around your own neck, nor in eating nothing but vegetables. When you really look for me, you will see me instantly. you will find me in the tiniest house of time. Kabir says, student, tell me, what is God? He is the breath inside the breath. He also wrote, wherever you are is the entry point. But now it was time to attend the conference on Commonwealth and American Women's Discourse. So I said goodbye to my sister and I flew down to Bangalore. So you can see Uttar Pradesh then is the lime green near the top next to Nepal, and Bangalore is right down in the south in the state of Karnataka, the lime green right down at the bottom. And at the airport, I met up with my friend Patty and a number of other American academics who had flown in for the conference. Now, there was a bus laid on to take us through to Mysore, but on the way we stopped at Seringapatam. Seringapatam was the palace of Tipu Sultan, who was the ruler of the state of Mysore. He died in the siege of Seringapatam in 1799. He was the very last Indian ruler to hold out against the private army of the British East India Company, which at that time was twice the size of the real British army. Needless to say, Tipu Sultan was not very fond of the British. And if you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, you will find Tipu's tiger organ. And I believe that if you wind the handle, you can actually hear the roar of the tiger and the cries of the hapless British soldier. But at last we arrived in Mysore. Now, happily, our stay coincided, it included a Sunday evening, because only on Sunday evening for 1 hour, they light up the city palace, which does look truly wonderful. The conference went very well. Our paper was well received, and we made some lasting friends among the Indian academics and graduate students. After the conference, we visited the Brindavan Gardens. Now, the Brindavan Gardens were created in the early 1930s next to the Krishna Raja Sagara Dam. You can see the dam wall in the background there. 60 acres of beautiful gardens with fountains which are illuminated at night and play in time to music. But now it was time to go back to the United States. So I will give the last word to Mark Twain. He described India as the land of dreams and romance, of splendor and rags, of palaces and hovels, of tigers and elephants, the cobra and the jungle, the country of 100 nations and 100 tongues, of 1,000 religions and 2 million gods, the one land that all desire to see, and having seen once by even a glimpse, would not give that glimpse for the shows of all the rest of the world combined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rohan, for a lovely presentation. I omitted to mention at the beginning of this that if you want to make a comment or a question, you can click on the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. I think it's on the right-hand side of your screen, and just make a comment. But I think it was such a inspiring talk that we're all feeling a little bit overwhelmed with all the information and all the thoughts that come in. And I think it's one of those things where you just absorb and admire it rather than ask questions. Are there any questions at all? Beautiful tour from Paul. Thank you very much, Paul. I'm just waiting to see if anyone else has got any comments. Well, thank you very much, Rohan, for a very, very entertaining, enjoyable and educational tour. Thanks, Rohan, indeed.
Great, thank you very much.